and you're listening to Communities Live on Sheffield Live Radio 93.2 FM with me, Susie Casson, and T-Boy, and we're joined in the studio by Julian Dobson, who is the author of How to Save Our Town Centres.
Hi.
Welcome, Julian. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So can you tell us, first of all, what is Urban Pollinators?
So, Urban Pollinators is a research company that helps people share ideas about how to make places better. So, pollination, it's about connecting things up and making things happen. And urban, because I'm interested in towns and cities and spaces where people live together. And that company grew out of work that I'd previously done as a journalist running a magazine called New Start, which is around urban regeneration and community development.
Great, so you're based here in Sheffield.
And based here in Sheffield, lived here for 15 years, so I think I'm almost local now.
Fantastic. So you recently published a book. What inspired you to write it?
So I was looking at town centres for quite a long time as places where people live together, where people interact, where people meet, the hub of communities in many ways. And in 2011, the then Prime Minister David Cameron commissioned Mary Portas to do a review of the High Street. And I was quite sceptical about this at first, but I got a bunch of people together to put in some proposals to that review, and that started a whole load of conversations. And out of that came the idea for the book, which really is to challenge some of the thinking around town centres and city centres, which sees them all as development opportunities, which sees them all as places to shop, and where you have this kind of clone town syndrome where everywhere starts to look alike. And thinking, how can you actually make places different, give places more opportunities to be creative, allow people to have actually more say in the places that they live in.
Yeah, great. So why are our town centres struggling so much at the moment, would you say?
Well, there's a whole load of reasons, and the kind of reason on the surface that people point to is there aren't enough of the right kind of shops that people want to go to, and I'd challenge that. I think that there are things that are going on in retail and shopping, which means that the nature of the shopping centre is changing, and primarily that's because of the internet, the rise of online shopping. People are actually shopping in different ways. But I think the thing that people often don't look at is the way that the kind of civic functions, the public services are being stripped out of town centres, and we're seeing the kind of general degrading of the sort of places that people use not to shop, but actually to socialise, to enjoy life. And libraries are a particular example, and I know that there's a particular issue with Sheffield City Centre about the Central Library at the moment, and I think it would be an absolute tragedy if that type of civic space was lost or downgraded within the city centre. So why are town centres struggling? I think they're struggling because they're no longer places where people come in to do all sorts of things. You don't have that kind of multiplicity of functions and of activities within the town centre, and what you need in order to make a place work is a whole lot of different types of activities. So Sheffield's quite good in some respects in terms of events, things like tram lines, things like Festival of the Mind. That's great use of city centre space. A place to live, it's kind of dominated really by student accommodation at the moment. I think if you could actually make it more livable, and you could do something about creating more high quality public spaces, green spaces within the city centre.
Yeah, and there's the Live After 5 campaign, I think, isn't there, to encourage people not just to work and go home.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, again, that should not just be about shopping and leisure, but actually about a whole lot of other activities as well. So, why don't we actually start seeing the city centre much more as a democratic space, a place where people are able to engage in conversations which aren't just about spending money.
Absolutely. So you mentioned libraries is very important. What other elements would you say are required to ensure that a town centre is thriving?
Okay, so public events are a big one. At all sorts of different scales. So there could be kind of very small scale, and there needs to be that kind of fine grain where you've got lots of opportunities for people to do small things in small places and bring people together. It doesn't have to take over the whole city centre like tram lines. I think a wide variety of different kinds of space for people to do stuff. So one of the great things that a lot of people don't know about in the city centre is Union Street, the cooperative working environment there, where you've actually got spaces where people can come in, rent a desk for a little while, hobnob with other people, a bit like the workstation here, but on a smaller scale. And actually, I think you need the small scale as well as the big scale. So if you look at the retail quarter plans, a lot of that is about big offices, HSBC taking a 15-year lease. Actually, where are the opportunities for entrepreneurs to do things, reusing a lot of the old buildings that are still there, being creative with them? And you need that kind of creativity. You also need you need that mix of functions, so health services, schools, education. The city centre is very, very dependent on the two universities. And in fact, if it wasn't for the investment by the universities, the city centre would probably struggle a lot more. But you need the universities to be much more engaged with the city as a whole, and vice versa, and you need much more kind of permeable space, so the university accommodation is actually used by people within the city and feels as if it belongs to them rather than being something separate and kind of blocked off from them.
Yeah. So how is Sheffield doing as a city centre compared to elsewhere in the UK?
I think kind of fair is probably the best you can say about it. It's but again, you've got to ask, what kind of city centre do we want? Do we want to be like Leeds or Manchester? And I think no, we don't. Why do we want to just kind of create the same sort of retail environment as anywhere else? Why can't we do something that is different? Why can't we do something that is more reflective of the kind of Sheffield culture, the DIY kind of culture that you've got in this city? And how can you create the spaces to do that? So I think there's an opportunity there that over many, many years, successive council administrations have not had the courage to take. And that is about not saying let's do a big deal with a developer, but let's create the space where you can have hundreds of small deals going on and a real kind of multiplicity of creative stuff happening. And I think that is the opportunity for Sheffield, and it's an opportunity that's not really being taken. I think Sheffield has got a lot to offer. I think there are clusters of interesting independent activity, mostly actually outside the city centre, but obviously Division Street, Devonshire Street is a good example of some of that small scale stuff. But if you look at what's happened with Abbeydale Road and the Antiques Quarter, or if you look at kind of successful neighbourhoods like Crooks or Firth Park, even there are things that are happening there that you could replicate within the city centre. Places where places of possibility, places that are available for experimentation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have great pride in Sheffield city centre.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can all do to help it thrive?
I think there's always the question, what can an individual do? You can't do very much. What you can do is think about how and where you spend your money. Are you supporting local businesses wherever you can? Are you supporting the independent culture of Sheffield? So how can we as individuals bend our spend? I think there's an issue about having your say whether people listen to you or not, and making sure that your voice is heard. When there was a planning application for Devonshire Street, the potential demolition of Rare and Racier. There are thousands of objections to that. The council ignored them, but actually if you keep objecting, if you keep making your voice heard, eventually things do change, and it might not be in this generation, but it might be in the next one.
Yeah, because thinking about the future, the city's changing a lot. What changes do you think would be most helpful in, say, the next 5 years in Sheffield?
In the next 5 years, I think more opportunities for people to do small-scale stuff. I think the new retail quarter, the Sheffield retail quarter, in many, many ways that's a missed opportunity. But there's lots of other space that is going to become available as a result of that. Lots of space which is being underused, which isn't great quality, and I think creating a culture where stuff can happen in those spaces is a good start. Actually making some of those spaces available for start-up businesses, for experimentation, would be a good start. I think longer term, what I'd like to see is a much greener Sheffield city centre, and that's not just much greener in terms of green space, in terms of more trees, in terms of creating public parks, which I think we could do more with actually in the city centre itself. Peace Gardens is great, but that's quite a small compact space. You could do more, but thinking about how can we make Sheffield city centre more sustainable, more geared to a future where environmental challenges are actually going to be much more to the forefront. How can we make Sheffield a genuinely green city, a genuinely outdoor city, one that is not just about endless consumption, but is actually about a much more democratic space, a much more imaginative space, where people can have a say in the future of their city centre, and where we've got a city centre that is more geared up for a future that might be actually very uncertain.
Yeah. And what do you see as the longer term future for the city, say in 20, 30 years' time?
It's very, very hard to know which way it's going, but I think what I would like to see is what I've just been talking about, a much greener Sheffield city centre, and a place where there are opportunities and for people to actually be involved on what I'd call a massive small scale in changing the city for the better, and that's about opening up spaces for new ideas. I'm not going to, as an individual, have all the great ideas for Sheffield city centre. The council as a collective of individuals isn't. But actually, if you open up the place to the people, and for hundreds and thousands of ideas of how to make individual spaces better and how to make the collective work, then I think you might be onto something.
Fantastic. So finally, Julian, if you could make one big change to Sheffield town centre, what would it be?
I think the one big change would be to have lots of little changes. I think we've spent a long time in this city thinking that there's going to be one big change that will make the difference, and it's always been the retail quarter, it's always been a new shopping centre, or it's been the tram, or it's been something else. Let's actually start to work much more organically. Let's stop thinking about what's the big development, the big investment that will make the difference, and start thinking, how can we work with the many, many small investments that actually make this city what it is. And that's primarily the investment of the people who live here and the lives that they live here.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. So your book is How to Save Our Town Centres.
That's right.
How can people find out more?
And people can find out more about that either from my website, urbanpollinators.co.uk, or from Policy Press, the publishers who are